So your question was,
yeah, this is what you do. This is your purpose, right? You've been involved in language in languages, in particular, I think in particular Spanish. I don't know if you have other languages, your Portuguese as well.
so yeah, so and I always give the real story. So, but I'm gonna go deeper because we fret. So we're gonna dive a little deeper. So I was first exposed to languages from a European standpoint. I moved early on to Germany and as a child, and that was my first experience with a foreign language. Um, Learned German not from a like an advanced stage, but I learned from a conversational standpoint how to, to be able to function within society while we lived there. And was there for a few years and then came back to the United States. Well, German was never my thing, but I said, well, while I was over there, I had gotten exposed to more Spanish speakers. And you can take that for what it's worth, but for me, it was, young boy, coming up in his, in his age. I saw some things and I was like, whoo, need to learn his Spanish. So when we got back, and that was a class that was offered. I was like, oh man, definitely want to learn Spanish. So I started out from there. That was my first initial thing as far as an actual class. And then proceeded to undergrad, and in undergrad I did Spanish, and then I was like, I'm gonna take a break. They had a break where you could actually, and I was talking about this last weekend, you can actually take in some schools, I don't know, but everybody's university may be different, but in mine they had Portuguese for Spanish speakers, and that was the gateway that tied me over into Portuguese. And I would never claim to be fluent, but I can, function in Portuguese, and I can say what I need to say. I'm not like, I can't give a public speech or anything, but I definitely can function in it. And if I went back and dove into it even more, I would definitely be able to function in it. But I was talking to a gentleman, and I would say this, a gentleman that is Haitian by birth, and we were discussing this earlier today, and we were saying that the ability for somebody, once they engage in one language that's outside of their normal language, it makes it easier for them to acquire a new language. Because once you've gotten that first one under your belt, that first new language outside of your native language, the next one that follows is going to be easier because you know the steps that you had to take. And that's an advantage to being, that's one of those benefits that we talk about. Once you grasp and you can obtain that first foreign language or the first world language, or whatever you want to call it, the language outside of your native language, once you get that first one, the second, the third, the fourth are so much easier to obtain because you know the steps that you have to take. I'm not a polyglot by any means, and it's because I don't practice to be one. And I want to make sure people understand. There's a strict line for me where people say, oh, so-and-so is a polyglot. Oh, so-and-so speaks 20 languages. Whoop-de-doo. That's not something that I look to do in life. I just want to be the best I can be in Spanish and be the best that I can be when I need to function in Portuguese. And then, of course, there are 3 more languages I want to, and then, of course, I wouldn't fall into that polyglot situation. But I'm trying to focus on being the best I can be to steer people to Spanish. And if I can break things down in Spanish for others that want to learn Spanish, that's my focus. That's my end goal.
Okay. Why Spanish? ¿Por qué español?
Oh man, ¿por qué español? Man. That's a good one. So let's talk about it. So for me, Spanish goes back for me, and I was, I'll tell my age, I'm not ashamed, but 1987, there was a movie that came out that was called Three Amigos. Martin Sheen, Chevy Chase, Steve Martin Short, sorry. Martin Short, I think this is his name, Martin Short, Steve Martin, and Chevy Chase. And they did the Three Amigos. They had El Guapo. They had the people there. And at the end of the movie, when the Three Amigos were leaving town, just to give a quick synopsis, the short guy, I want to say his name was Martin Short, but I don't know. Now I'm second guessing his name on it. But anyways, he had a young lady come out and was like, I think she said, "Hasta luego, Ned." That was his name in the movie, "Hasta luego, Ned." But when she popped out, and I was in about third grade, I said, "Oh, yes, sir. I'm going to learn this language right here." When she popped out, all white lace, she had the all white lace on, the light brown eyes. I said, "Yes, sir. I'm going to learn this thing." That was third grade. So you can see the motivation was different from me, but that was my motivation. And hey, you can't knock my motivation, right?
No,
yeah. That was my thing. And so from that, but the stars aligned perfectly for me in that situation, because in the city that I grew up in, they would send down Spanish 3, Spanish 4, Spanish 5, AP Spanish students to the elementary schools that were surrounding the area, and they would actually teach the younger kids from K through 3 Spanish. And so that was our breaking point. That kind of brought me into the language in itself, but it was also the standpoint of, I want to be like these kids when I get to high school, because they're coming down and they're teaching kids mindset 101. Now, granted, I'll tell you this. At that point, I never even thought about teaching Spanish. Oh, my mind was on being like Heathcliff Huxtable. I wanted to be a doctor. I was going to marry a lawyer.
Right.
Spanish was just going to be, my wife was going to speak Spanish, because that was the mindset. It was never even a thing that I wanted to pursue from an teach, Spanish education. Wow, how things come full circle, right? So, but that was my initial touch on learning the language. And from that standpoint, of course, going into living in Europe and being, I guess, inundated with the different, Latino heritages that I came across, the Cubanos, the Dominicanos, the Puerto Ricanos, the Boricuas, whatever. They all came together, and I was getting all that together at one time in Germany, which was fire. It was amazing. And then I come back to good old deep South, Carolina del Norte, and it's like, you might catch somebody that spoke Spanish. You might not. I'm talking about, early to mid 90s.
Right.
And I was just like, this is not, I was still trying to focus from an academic standpoint. The academic standpoint was the only access I really had. I had a few friends that were, descendants. They were, native speakers or whatever, but they didn't really fool with us like that.
Right.
When I say us, I mean like from an African-American standpoint, they was like, yeah, I'm gonna speak this for my people. But when you trying to practice, I ain't about that life. And that was the thing in the 90s. It was like, I'm not really there with you. And there was no real connection.
Right.
But when I got to the undergrad standpoint, that's where I was able to be myself, being an individual, and actually pursue it. And what really drove me from that point was finding out, because I didn't know that there were Black people like me that spoke Spanish.
In my Seattle.
It blew my mind that there were people that lived across the Americas that spoke Spanish, didn't speak English, that were brought across on the same slave trade situation and spread throughout Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. That's what blew my mind. And it was one class. I swear to sweet Jesus, I was on my way to med school. That was my mindset. Go to undergrad, I'm going to med school. But then I took one class, Blacks in Latin America. And then what happened to me? I got sucked in. Next thing I know, I'm like, what's your major, Omar? Latin American studies. Oh, you not going to med school no more? Nah, man, that ain't for me. I don't even like blood. You know, it was just that, it was that different for me. And it like, once I found out about it,
yeah,
it was all over at that point. It was all over. I was all in on finding out about our brothers and sisters that lived across the Americas and how we got disconnected. Uh-oh.